Hi, everyone. I'm Diane Brady. I'm here with David Greenberg, who is a professor of history and journalism at Rutgers. David, welcome. We're talking about Jimmy Carter. Tell us, in general, his legacy. How was he viewed as a president?
Right. Well, Jimmy Carter was president during a very difficult time. And at the end of someone's life, I think we always like to kind of look back and see the good and say some kind words. There's certainly accomplishments of Carter's that we can praise that I think still have impact today. The Camp David Accords and foreign policy, bringing peace between Israel and Egypt, was really a landmark. He also built on Nixon's opening to China and normalized relations with communist China, which, for better or worse, was a necessary step. I think most people would agree. But I think we also have to be honest and realistic in assessing anyone's legacy. And the fact of the matter is, Carter was had a very difficult presidency. He was turned out of office quite resoundingly after one term. He struggled with the economy, lost the confidence of the American people, and had some real disasters in foreign policy, particularly the Iranian hostage crisis, which, as much as anything, I think spelled the end of his presidency. So we can sort of look back on him with some warm feelings and admiration for a life well lived, while also acknowledging that this was a difficult and often unsuccessful presidency.
What were some of the key mistakes he made on the economic front? Because a lot of that is being replicated today in terms of conditions, inflation, fear of high unemployment. What do people fault him for not doing?
Well, it was the case that he had high inflation. And unlike today, where the employment picture is pretty good, we were also struggling just with the economy in general, with economic growth and employment. Interest rates were really through the roof. And it took Carter a long time to get his hands around the problem. Eventually, he did appoint Paul Volcker to the Federal Reserve, who most people credit with a policy of tight money that brought down inflation over time. Of course, it didn't really pay off until the Reagan years, which was sort of a bitter irony for Jimmy Carter. And again, you can see Biden, acknowledging, however grudgingly, that the Fed is doing the right thing and raising interest rates. It's really the best medicine we have, even though it can be painful for containing inflation. But Carter's problems on the economy went beyond that. We had an energy crisis that he did not, again, get his arms around in time. So gas prices were high. There was rationing. You could only go to the gas station, on certain days, depending on what number your license plate ended in. People were siphoning the gas out of other people's tanks illegally. So it really gave rise to almost a feeling of panic, a crisis economy. And that's, I think, really where it started to feel like, the strong, robust American economy. Yeah, we go through ups and downs, we have mild recessions, but it felt like things were out of control.
Before we move on to his post-presidency years, I want to remind people what a long shot he was to be president in the first place. Is that a fair assessment?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, part of the drama of Jimmy Carter's story, and I think one reason that he captured the imagination of so many Americans, and I think still captures, the imagination and affection of a lot of people, is here was a one-term former governor of Georgia. He was not necessarily one of the leading candidates in a very big field of Democrats in 1976. I mean, on the contrary, when he told his mother he was running for president. She said, "President of what?" He wasn't most people's idea of a plausible first-tier contender. But in a divided field, he made the smart bet to put resources into the Iowa caucuses, which were only then sort of emerging as this launching pad, which they would later become for presidential nominees. And so once he wins Iowa, he's suddenly everywhere in the media. And again, in a divided field, he wasn't quite a liberal. The liberals liked Mo Udall and Scoop Jackson, and he wasn't quite a populist, but he was, enough things to enough people that he could rally to get the nomination. Really, what he was running on was a kind of anti-Washington, anti-government outsider approach. And after Vietnam and after Watergate, that message really sold. People wanted something different, someone from outside Washington, not a skilled Washington insider. Now, that kind of outsider quality also, I think, came back to hurt him, since he didn't have the relationships on Capitol Hill or that Washington experience that he needed for some of his challenges. But it was what a lot of people liked about him, and what I think brought him to the White House.
So he's been very active, of course, since 1980 as a former president. I know we talk about Habitat for Humanity. He emerges in unusual ways, in terms of, should we say, weighing in on political debates. How would you view that period? And let's start with how he was viewed by other presidents, because he was certainly active during the terms of many of his successors.
Yeah, that's right. We tend to think about Carter as this terrific post-president, as someone who devoted the years after leaving the White House to noble causes, as you say, like Habitat for Humanity, which builds homes for the needy, to election monitoring enterprises in a whole range of countries, which was really important in spreading democracy. Also to eradicating certain diseases like guinea worm in Africa. So people know, and I think rightly admire, that legacy. On the other hand, as you suggest, he was not well liked by his successors, neither Republicans nor Democrats particularly. With George Bush Sr., when he was assembling a coalition to force Saddam Hussein to withdraw, eventually through force, from Kuwait, which he had invaded. Bush was trying to do this through international law by getting a United Nations authorization to do so. Carter went behind his back and starts telling other world leaders not to support America's initiative, not to support the American position. Bush found out about this from Canadian Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. And, I think most people would agree, whether you were for or against Bush or for or against the first Gulf War, this is not something a former president really should be doing, is sort of explicitly undermining his successor. As Bush said, we only have one president at a time. Then again, with Bill Clinton, Clinton sent him to North Korea to do some diplomacy with that very still difficult situation. Carter really overstepped his boundaries, went on CNN without permission to declare an agreement that he had reached without, having had White House authorization to do that. Clinton and his team were furious. So there's a lot of ways in which Carter had a very moral, deeply religious conviction that what he was doing was the virtuous thing, the right thing. And often it was, but, in politics, you have to trust that other people also believe they're doing the right thing. And you can't just substitute your righteousness for their considered position. And I think people found Carter, as Americans did somewhat when he was president, to be too self-righteous, too pious, too holier than thou. And this sort of undermined some of the moral authority that he hoped to wield.
So it was really morally driven as opposed to him basically assuming he should still be president.
Well, look, I think those kinds of things tend to go hand in hand, right? Carter did think himself in a way better than others, smarter or with superior moral compass. And the problem is, again, many people think that of themselves, but you have to sort of subordinate those to the practical realities. And he allowed himself to convince himself, as it were, that he was just correct, and so that his judgment should take precedence. And that was really unfortunate. We saw it again in the Middle East in his later years, where he veered uncomfortably close to anti-Semitic positions and trying to demonize Israel as an apartheid state. I mean, set aside all the reasonable, legitimate criticisms of Israeli policy that he and many other presidents have made. This was a step into a kind of propagandistic stance that really rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. But he was convinced of his own righteousness, and I think that was a failing of Carter's that you see running through the presidency and the post-presidency.
Let me go full circle, because I do think that net there is a residual fondness, right now in the American psyche for Jimmy Carter. So, when you look at that, how do you think he will be remembered?
Well, look, I think, again, whenever a president is in his twilight or when a president dies, there's a very understandable wish not to speak ill of the dead, to go back and to highlight the accomplishments, the admirable features of that person's personality or presidency. And I think that's all to the good. That's a very different question from what will historians, 20, 50, 100 years from now say about the Carter presidency. The sad truth is most presidents, if they're remembered at all, will get a paragraph or two. And I think Carter will be remembered as the president who sort of embodied these years of drift and crisis of the late 70s, of economic difficulties at home, of what he himself called a crisis of confidence in his famous speech of July 1979, and also of America failing with its leadership abroad, with the Iranian hostage crisis again, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. So I think Carter, to the extent that he'll be remembered, will be remembered for this, for sort of trying and not very successfully steering the country during a very turbulent time, during a time, again, post-Watergate, post-Vietnam, where a lot of the optimistic dreams and ambitions of the post-war era had come to a halt, and we were searching for a new direction. He had the bad luck to be president at a difficult time, but he also lacked sort of the qualities of greatness that a different president might have brought to bear on the situation.
Great. David Greenberg, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.